In the heart of the New York night, there is a torch that has been dark for more than a century. On Liberty Island, the Statue of Liberty stands in silence. Her copper skin has turned green with age. The light in her hand has been gone since 1916. Since that night, no one has ever stepped inside the torch. No one knows what sleeps within that raised arm. The Statue of Liberty, dedicated in 1886, 93 meters tall, a symbol of freedom, of hope. But deep within her aging copper frame, there is a hidden path and a small room where light once lived. Tonight, we will open more than a door. We will open a memory, sealed between sea and wind, the first light, the moment of the explosion, and the small chamber inside the heart of the Statue of Liberty, a place where time still lies, waiting to be called by name. Paris, 1865. In a small room during the summer heat, the glow of an oil lamp spread across a wooden table. Around it sat a handful of scholars and politicians. They spoke of freedom, of revolutions, and of a nation across the ocean, where the spirit of democracy was burning brighter than ever. The man leading that conversation was Edouard de La Boulaye, a scholar, a jurist. I am also a believer that the will of human beings could shape the course of history. As the wine glasses sank halfway, La Boulaye spoke softly. "If liberty shines in America," he said, "that light will spread across all of humanity." That single thought became the seed of a dream. At that time, France still lived under imperial rule. Freedom was more a longing than a reality. La Boulaye wanted to create a symbol, not one born of weapons or war, but of light. A symbol that said freedom did not belong to one nation. It was the sacred right of all humankind. From that idea came a name, Frederick Auguste Bartholdi, a young sculptor searching for the form of his generation's faith. He had once dreamed of enormous statues standing by the Nile or in the winds of the desert, guiding travelers through the darkness. Now that dream had found its name, the lady who enlightens the world. When Bartholdi met La Boulaye, he said quietly, "I want to create a torch for humanity, a torch that can be seen from anywhere." And so, the journey of the Statue of Liberty began. Not in New York, but in Paris. Bartholdi spent years studying the image of Libertas, the Roman goddess of freedom, a woman crowned with 7 rays of light, a torch in one hand, a tablet in the other, inscribed with the promise of liberty. Each sketch carried the same message. That light can reach even the deepest shadows. The statue's name would be La Liberté éclairant le monde, liberty enlightening the world. A name simple and sacred, a declaration that light could become the common language of humankind. In 1871, Bartholdi sailed from Paris to America in search of a home for the statue. As the ship entered New York Harbor, he stood silently on the deck. Before him, Manhattan rose through the mist, and in the middle of the bay, a small island appeared. Bedloe's Island, the place we now call Liberty Island. Bartholdi whispered, "The light will find its home here." When he returned to France, he began to build models, raise funds, and call it a gift. A gift from the people of France to the people of the United States. It is not a gift of pride, but a reminder to the world that freedom is a light meant to be passed on. Every drawing, every mold, every strike of the hammer was a prayer for that ideal. The French gave their skill, the Americans gave their land, and in a workshop in Paris, through the clang of metal and the spark of fire, the form of a symbol slowly appeared. The statue's face was modeled after Bartholdi's mother, a woman of kindness and quiet strength. The torch in her right hand stood for the light of knowledge. The tablet in her left carried the date July 4th, 1776, the day America declared its independence. The 7 rays of her crown stood for the 7 continents and 7 seas, to show that liberty has no borders. Her right foot was lifted, pressing upon a broken chain, the mark of freedom, and the torch, rising high into the sky, became the soul of it all. In an old journal, Bartholdi once wrote, "I want her to face the sunrise, toward the first light of day, and toward the parts of the world still searching for freedom. From the beginning, that light was never meant to shine for one nation alone. It was meant to awaken the freedom sleeping within every human heart." And so, from Laboulaye's quiet study in Paris to Bartholdi's working hands, the Statue of Liberty was born, not as a monument of copper and iron, but as a dream cast in metal, a dream that carried the breath of 2 continents, united by a single hope: freedom. When Bartholdi's design was approved, the greatest challenge was no longer the idea itself. It was how to make a statue nearly 100 meters tall stand firm against the Atlantic winds. He needed someone who could turn art into engineering, someone who could teach metal how to breathe with the weather. That man was Gustave Eiffel, a young French engineer who would later leave his mark on Paris with the tower that bears his name. Eiffel was more than an engineer. He was a poet of steel, a man who saw beauty in its strength and grace in its form. When Bartholdi placed the clay model before him, Eiffel looked long at the raised arm of the statue and said softly, "If this is the light that will shine upon the world, its frame must endure the storm." From that moment, the inner structure began to take shape, a design unlike anything built in the 19th century. Eiffel created a central iron pylon, a spine of steel from which hundreds of ribs extended like the bones of a living being. The system allowed the statue to move with the wind, to expand and contract with heat and cold, and to live without breaking. It was a revolution in engineering. Steel, once thought rigid and lifeless, became supple under Eiffel's hand. It learned to move with the air, to breathe with the sky. Around that skeleton, Bartholdi placed 300 copper panels, each less than 3 millimeters thick. They were joined by thousands of rivets, each one hammered by hand. Altogether, the copper skin weighed just over 80 tons. light enough for the statue to sway with the wind without falling. Every element was carefully measured. The force of the harbor winds, the stretch of metal under the summer sun, the weight pressing on her feet. Even the tilt of the torch was planned, so it could lean a few centimeters in the wind and still remain strong. Numbers became poetry in their hands. Inside the statue, a spiral staircase rose through the core, leading upward toward the crown. Each step echoed softly through the hollow space, like the slow heartbeat of a giant made of bronze. When the wind passed through, it sang. Its voice lingered inside the hollow frame, a deep and trembling sound that no one composed, yet has been played for more than a century. In his journal, Bartholdi wrote, "When I stood inside her, I heard the wind speak. It touched the copper, and I knew she had a soul." The statue was more than a triumph of design. It was a bridge between two continents. The iron frame was built in Eiffel's workshop in Paris. The pedestal was designed in New York by the American architect Richard Morris Hunt. When the two came together, it was not only a meeting of materials, it was the meeting of two civilizations. At that time, no one had ever attempted to move such a monument across the ocean. The entire statue was dismantled into 350 pieces, packed into more than 200 wooden crates, and carried across the Atlantic. In 1885, the ship Isère arrived in New York Harbor. Crowds filled the docks. They came not just to welcome a gift, but to witness a promise that the light of freedom would soon rise over the American sky. During the days of assembly, the wind from the bay never stopped. The copper warmed under the morning sun, then cooled again with the evening fog. They said the statue changed color each day, red in sunlight, grey in mist, until one morning the copper began to turn green, the color of time, the color of the sea, a natural armor that would protect her forever. If you stand inside the statue when the wind is still, you can hear a faint hum, not loud, not clear, but deep and alive, like the breath of a giant at rest. In that silence, you understand why Eiffel called her the harp of the wind. Every current of air is a string. Every shift in temperature is a breath. And in those quiet vibrations, the statue ceases to be a monument. She becomes something living, something that listens, something that holds within her stillness the breath of freedom. When the final sheet of copper was set in place, Bartholdi stepped back and stood still in the hazy smoke of his Paris workshop. Before him rose the figure of the Statue of Liberty, strong, calm, her torch lifted toward the sky. But that light did not yet belong to America. It still had to cross the ocean. It still had to find its home on a small island in New York Harbor, where millions dreamed of one day arriving. From that island, if you looked west, you could see ships slowly entering the harbor. On their decks were tired faces, worn by weeks at sea, carrying old suitcases and fragile hopes. And there, waiting for them, Bartholdi's statue would be the first sight at dawn. At that time, Liberty Island was still called Bedloe's Island, a small patch of land but placed where the whole world would see it. It stood at the entrance to Manhattan, like a silent guardian at the gates of freedom. Immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Germany, and Poland looked up from the decks of their ships and saw the torch raised high. It was not just metal. It was a hand reaching out to welcome them. Many of them wept. They did not know English, but they understood light. To New Yorkers, she was pride. To immigrants, she was hope. From above, her torch caught the glow of the sunset. Each morning, the first light touched her green shoulders. The city awoke. Steam from the ships drifted past her, wrapping her in fog. And Bartholdi once wrote, "If there is a place on this earth worthy for liberty to stand guard, it is here, between the sea and the sky of New York." October 28th, 1886. The Statue of Liberty was unveiled. Tens of thousands gathered at the harbor. American and French flags waved together in the wind. President Grover Cleveland, once a critic of the project, now led the ceremony. When the veil fell away, the crowd erupted in cheers and cannon fire. And then, for a moment, the city went quiet. All eyes turned upward. No one looked at each other. They all looked at her, as if waiting for something greater than themselves. That night, the first lights were turned on. The torch gave only a faint gleam, a small glow in the mist of the bay. People had expected a blaze bright enough to light the sky, but instead, they saw only a shimmer moving across the water. Some were disappointed. Some smiled. Most simply stood in silence, because they knew that small light had crossed an ocean to be here. A journalist wrote, "The torch may not yet burn bright, but its meaning already lights the world." Years passed. The statue became the heart of New York and then of America itself. Around her flowed the wind, the waves, and the endless stories of those who came seeking a new beginning. Among them was a young Jewish poet named Emma Lazarus. She was born in New York and raised in an immigrant family. She understood the feeling of being caught between two worlds, the home left behind and the promise ahead. When she learned of the statue, she wrote a poem called The New Colossus to help raise funds for its pedestal. Her poem was not about power or pride. It was about kindness, about a nation that opened its arms to those who were weary and wandering. She wrote with the heart of someone who had known loss and still believed in hope. Some of her lines would become the soul of the statue. They were engraved on a bronze plaque inside the pedestal in 1903. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." Since then, Emma's words have mingled with the wind and the waves around the island. A soft, endless welcome whispered to every traveler who arrives. When people read her poem today, they understand that this statue was never only made of copper and rivets. She is a dream, a breath of hope, a voice across the ocean, reminding the world of its most sacred gift, freedom. She still stands, facing east, where the sun begins. The 7 rays of her crown catch the first gold of morning, and her torch, though dim, still reaches toward the sky, like the steady breath of a dream that never dies. She was never just metal. She is the whisper of freedom across the sea, a small light, still bright enough to guide those who drift in search of a shore. Inside that green copper shell lies another world, a world few have ever seen. Most visitors stop at the plaza below, gazing up at her steady form from afar. But inside her body, behind the thin copper skin and Eiffel's iron frame, runs a maze of hidden passages, a place where wind turns into music and light becomes mystery. The journey begins through a small steel door at the base. The air inside feels different, cool, dim, and echoing with the faint hum of metal. A narrow spiral staircase winds upward around the central steel column. Each step gives off a soft, low sound, like the heartbeat of a giant made of bronze. From here, 162 steps lead upward, from the base to the crown, where 7 rays stretch out like a halo of freedom. Those who climb say it feels less like walking through a monument and more like stepping through history itself. Along the way, pale light seeps through tiny seams in the copper, casting thin golden streaks on the steel walls. When the wind passes, the statue moves, not enough to see, but enough to feel. Those who reach the crown describe it as sacred, as if standing on the edge between the physical and the spiritual. But the journey does not end there. From the crown, a hidden passage continues, narrow, silent, just wide enough for one person at a time. It curves through the right arm, enclosed like an iron tunnel, lined with small bulbs that shimmer on old rivets and aged copper. When you look up, you can see a faint glow ahead. The torch, the end of the climb. Few know that inside the torch once existed a tiny chamber. Harper's Weekly in 1886 called it a small maintenance room, a space built to control the light. According to the US Lighthouse Board, when the statue once served as a lighthouse, that chamber held gears, cables, and early electrical systems used to power the torch. The room was only a few meters wide, sealed tight, surrounded by copper and iron. When the wind passed through, the walls trembled softly, releasing a low metallic sigh. In the original plans, there was a note. On the north side of the torch, a small round window. Through it, engineers could look out across the bay, watching the light spread toward the city. From that small window, they could see New York Harbor, and far beyond, the misty outline of Manhattan. Imagine standing there, inside the torch, surrounded by copper, with the wind and sea just outside. Light bouncing off the curved walls, dancing across the metal flame, making the space seem alive with its own breath. Bartholdi once said he wanted the torch to truly shine, not only as a symbol, but also as a real light, bright enough to touch the sky over New York Harbor. So when the statue was completed, the torch was fitted with 15 arc lamps and 14 incandescent bulbs. A complex web of wires ran through the arm, all leading to the glass panels at the top. When first lit, it was said to glow like the flame of dawn. But in truth, the light was faint. The ocean winds and salt air quickly corroded the wires and mirrors. Engineers had to climb into that small room almost every night to change bulbs and adjust the gears. In a journal from 1887, one line remains: "The torch hums and breathes like a living thing." It is hard to believe that, long before electricity was reliable, they tried to turn a sculpture into a working lighthouse. But that was the spirit of the age, a place where art and invention met in the open sky. Then the light faded, the system failed, and the small chamber inside the torch was sealed forever. After 1916, when the explosion at Black Tom shook New York Harbor, the stairway through the arm was closed for safety, and the room inside the torch was never opened again. The records of the Lighthouse Board ended in 1902. No more notes, no new reports. Only a few old black and white photographs remain. Images of engineers standing in that narrow space, looking out through the small round window toward the sea. Some say that on windy nights, if you stand near the raised arm of the statue, you can still hear something faint, a metallic echo, a distant hum, perhaps the sound of old gears that have not moved for more than 100 years. No one knows what remains behind that sealed door, only that deep within the copper and steel, there is still a silent chamber, the place that once held the mechanical heart of the Statue of Liberty, a place where light was born, where it went dark, and where only the wind remains now, telling the story in the quiet language of metal. The light once born inside the torch was never meant only to shine. It was meant to awaken the belief that freedom could illuminate the world. In the first years after her unveiling, that dream took shape. The Statue of Liberty was not just a symbol. She became the first lighthouse of a new age. In 1886, the US Lighthouse Board took control of the statue and operated it as a true beacon. It was a bold idea for its time, when electricity was still a luxury and arc lamps were the frontier of science. Inside the torch, 15 arc lamps were arranged in a circle. 14 incandescent bulbs lined the arm, all connected by copper wires hand-wrapped by craftsmen. The cables ran through the right arm to the top of the torch, powered by a generator inside the pedestal. When the lights came on, the torch glowed against the dark Atlantic sky. Bartholdi called it the electric heart of liberty. On that first night, people filled the harbor. They wanted to see the light of the future, the light of science, the light of a nation's pride. Against the black horizon, the Statue of Liberty stood in silence, her torch shining like a star just awakened. Newspapers wrote in awe, "The Lady of Liberty now watches over the harbor with an electric heart." But when the ships at sea looked towards her, they realized the truth. The light was too faint to guide them. The wind and mist swallowed it within a few miles. A report from the Lighthouse Board read simply, "The light is visible only under clear skies and fades quickly in fog." People were disappointed, but they did not lose faith. They believed the torch was never meant to guide ships. It was meant to guide souls. For the engineers, it was a daily challenge. Every night they climbed hundreds of steps to clean the mirrors, check the wires, and replace the bulbs corroded by salt air. When the wind grew strong, the statue's arm trembled slightly, and the copper wires brushed against the steel frame, making a faint metallic sound, a breath, a pulse, as if the statue itself were alive. One engineer in 1888 wrote, "At night, when all lights are on, she hums. The torch hums and breathes like a living thing." That image spread through poems and papers. A woman of bronze, breathing with the wind of the Atlantic. But for the Lighthouse Board, it was an expensive dream. The system was weak. The power is costly. The repairs are endless. By 1902, they stopped the light. The final report said, discontinued due to insufficient brightness and high maintenance cost. And so the torch went dark. The electric heart fell silent. The light faded, leaving only stillness. But when real light disappears, stories begin to glow. Because silence invites imagination. And when a symbol of light falls into shadow, people will always find a way to make it shine again in their minds. Rumors began to spread. Some said the original lights carried a secret code, a message between France and America. They said the lamps flashed in the rhythm of Morse code, sending greetings across the ocean, a song of light that only Bartholdi and Eiffel understood. No one ever proved it, but the story lived on. The papers called it the Code of Liberty's torch. People believed that when the torch flickered in the fog, it was not just electricity. It was a message. We are still free. Others claimed the torch once signaled to ships, its brightness shifting with tides and winds. Old sailors swore they saw the torch blink on the horizon, long after the system had been shut down. Some said it was lightning reflected in the glass. Others believed it was the old light returning, the memory of brightness glowing again through the copper. Historians say it was only a legend, but legends are human. When a flame dies, we keep it alive in our minds. Today, when you stand beneath her and look up, it's hard to believe that torch once burned and trembled and sang with the rhythm of the sea. All that remains now is green copper, aged steel, and a small sealed chamber where wires are rusted and gears lie still. No more light, only wind, touching the metal, carrying the faint echo of the past. A maintenance worker, years later, said that on quiet nights, when he stood below the torch, he could hear something soft, a slow breath steady and deep. Perhaps it was the sound of history itself, still moving inside the metal. Within those silent beams of iron lies a small, forgotten room, a room that once held the heart of light, a place where invention met hope, where fire and dream once lived, and then slept. Maybe even now, that hidden heart of the Statue of Liberty still rests quietly between sea and wind, between the light that has faded and the echo that never left, until one night that echo became a sound, a single blast that shook the harbor and lit the sky. From that night on, the door to the torch was never opened again. The night of July 30th, 1916. The sky above New York was heavy with clouds. Wind from the Atlantic swept across the harbor, carrying the scent of salt and coal. Through the mist to the southwest, on the docks of Black Tom Island, Dozens of train cars waited. Each one was filled with ammunition and explosives bound for Europe. Across the ocean, the First World War was burning. America was still neutral, but private companies quietly sent weapons to the Allies, to Britain, France, and Russia, their ships leaving each week under the cover of fog. Black Tom Island sat just off Jersey City, only a few kilometers from Liberty Island, a small, quiet port, but it held millions of pounds of gunpowder, fuses, and shells, a bomb resting in the heart of New York Harbor. No one knew that within hours, that place would scar the symbol of freedom itself. Just before midnight, guards on the island heard a small pop, a sound like fireworks in the distance. They thought little of it. Minutes later, the ground began to shake. A chain of explosions erupted, one after another, swallowing the docks in fire. The shockwave spread for miles, knocking people to the ground. Boxcars burst apart, and the sky filled with sparks and flame. The blast was so powerful that it shook the city like an earthquake. The harbor glowed red. Metal rained down into the water. Windows shattered in Manhattan, 10 kilometers away. People woke in terror, thinking the war had reached America. A journalist wrote the next morning, "The night sky turned white, and the city trembled as if struck by thunder from beneath the earth, and the Statue of Liberty saw it all." From Liberty Island, the lighthouse keeper said he saw a red sun rising from Jersey. Moments later, the shockwave reached her. It struck the statue, shaking the iron frame that Eiffel had built. The copper sheets rang with a deep metallic sound, like drums inside a storm. The right arm, the one holding the torch, took the full force of the blast. The iron ribs bent slightly. Some joints cracked. The copper skin rippled, and the glass windows of the torch shattered. When engineers inspected it later, they found that rivets near the shoulder had twisted, and the raised arm now leaned ever so slightly off-center. The chief engineer wrote, "The statue trembled for seconds, as if she were alive and afraid." Across the harbor, more than 20,000 windows broke. Immigrants on Ellis Island were evacuated at night. The fire on Black Tom burned for hours, rising into a black column that blanketed the city. The blast was so strong that the clock in the Woolworth building, the tallest in New York, stopped at 2:12 a.m., the exact moment of the largest explosion. When morning came, the waters around Liberty Island were covered with debris. A section of the torch's railing was bent. The glass shattered, and when the sun rose, people saw small dents across her right arm, scars that would never heal. That arm, once raised to light the world, now carried the wound of war. At first, the government said nothing, but months later, investigators confirmed the truth. It was no accident. German agents had planted the explosives to stop American weapons from reaching the Allies. 2 million pounds of ammunition had detonated. The shock was felt all the way to Philadelphia. The Black Tom explosion became the first time war had ever touched American soil. And the blast did more than shatter glass. It silenced the torch of the Statue of Liberty forever. After the explosion, Engineers from the National Park Service examined the damage. They found the joints in the right arm had weakened, making it unsafe to climb. From that day on, the stairway inside the arm, the narrow path that once led to the torch, was closed. The torch would never open again. In the weeks that followed, people said they could still hear a faint metallic hum when the wind passed through the statue, as if she was sighing. A reporter wrote, "The torch no longer shone, but every gust of wind seemed to carry her whisper. Since that night, no one has ever seen the harbour from her torch again. The iron stairs inside the arm have gone silent. The small chamber at the top, the heart of the light, has been sealed. The steel door closed, leaving only stillness inside. As if even light itself had learned to fear the sound of war. Today, if you stand at the harbour and look up, you can still see the faint marks on the torch, the place where the light once burned, the place where the blast once echoed. No one has stepped there in more than a century. Only the wind remains. It slips through the cracks of iron and sings the quiet song of memory. That night, freedom did not die, but its light bowed its head before war. And from that moment on, the torch, the symbol of hope, has remained silent. For more than 100 years, after the explosion, people realized something deeper had been lost. Not the trains, not the buildings, but the light that once burned from the torch of the Statue of Liberty. When the smoke cleared, a team of engineers was sent to Liberty Island. They examined the damage and found that the frame of her right arm had twisted. The joints had shifted slightly out of line. The narrow staircase that once led to the torch was no longer safe. The National Park Service made a decision. The torch would be closed permanently. No visitor would ever climb it again. From 1916 until now, the hidden steel door inside her right arm has remained locked. Inside, only wind and dust keep watch. Sometimes, engineers are allowed to climb up for inspection, but no one has touched those iron steps that have slept for more than a century. Since that day, the torch has been sealed in silence. The stairs are covered in dust. The copper inside has darkened with time. Outside, the green patina has thickened, hiding every scar the explosion left behind. And yet, the marks remain. Small dents along the right arm, scars of war etched into the skin of freedom. That arm leans slightly forward, as if she is bowing, quietly remembering the moment her light went dark. From then on, the Statue of Liberty could only see the world from her crown. 162 steps still carry visitors there, but the torch, the highest point, the heart of light, has been silent ever since. New Yorkers call it the sealed light. No one is allowed to touch it. No one can look out over the city from the place where the light once shone. But steel can close. Memory cannot. Years after the war ended, people began to tell a strange story. They said they remembered climbing to the torch. Not one person, hundreds of them. Mostly older New Yorkers who had lived in the city during the early 20th century. They spoke of the narrow staircase, the echo of metal, the small window overlooking the bay, the salt wind on their faces as they stood inside the torch. But it could not have happened. Every record of the National Park Service confirms that the torch has been closed since 1916, only days after the Black Tom explosion. No photos, no tickets, no written evidence that anyone ever returned. So why do so many people remember being there? Psychologists call it the Mandela effect, when a large group of people share the same false memory and believe it completely. In the case of the Statue of Liberty, that memory became legend. In letters, in old family stories, in conversations passed through generations, people said, "My parents once climbed the torch to see New York." Some described it in vivid detail. They remembered the light, the wind, the view, as if it truly happened. Maybe they were remembering the crown, or maybe, over time, their imagination and longing blended together until memory felt like truth. Because sometimes, the things people wish to touch, they create inside their minds. Some historians believe it began as a story told after the war. Parents said to their children, "People once climbed the torch," and those children grew up believing they had done it too. Personal memory became collective memory, and a myth slowly became real. A scholar once wrote in the Smithsonian, "The Statue of Liberty holds not only the torch of freedom, but also the torch of memory, fragile, shifting, and shared. Memory, like light, can fade in the world, but still burn inside the human heart. And maybe that is why so many believe they once stood in the torch, because they carried that light within them." The story of the Statue of Liberty's Mandela effect still drifts through cafes, through conversations, through the quiet corners of the internet. People argue, then fall silent, because even in that mistake, there is truth. The longing to touch freedom, the desire to stand where light was born. Today, the torch still stands high above the harbor. 93 meters of stillness. No light, no footsteps. Only the wind passes through, carrying the salt of the sea and the echo of the past. Inside, the narrow stairs are covered in dust. The small mechanical room, where light once breathed, is now only an empty space. If you stand on Liberty Island on a windy night and look up at her hand, you might understand. The torch, the symbol of freedom's light, was locked away on a night of war. Since then, its glow no longer shines across the water. It lives instead in the memory of the city, and perhaps in the whisper of the wind moving through her frame. That light still lingers there, not in fire, not in electricity, but in memory. And memory, like freedom, can never be sealed. Nearly a century had passed. The torch still stood, silent between sky and water. The copper had darkened to deep green, and the scars of war had become part of her skin. But in 1984, as America prepared to celebrate 100 years of the Statue of Liberty, a decision was made. The metal heart would be opened again, not to enter, but to heal. A massive restoration began. It lasted more than 2 years and brought together hundreds of engineers, metal workers, and preservationists from both sides of the Atlantic. They built scaffolding around her. They polished every copper plate. They inspected every joint and beam. For the first time since 1916, the torch was removed. Workers described the moment as taking a heart from a body. The empty arm hung in silence. The old torch was lowered to the ground by crane, resting behind a fence in the soft light of dawn. When they opened its weathered copper panels, a secret appeared. Inside was a narrow space that had been sealed for nearly a century. There, they found rusted gears, burned electrical wires, and thick glass cracked into layers. The remains of what had once been the mechanical heart of the original lighting system. A technical drawing in the Library of Congress matched it exactly. Next to the main electrical line was a handwritten note, "Chamber for lamp operator." The hidden room had truly existed, buried in metal, forgotten by time. When the engineers shone their lights inside, the reflection danced across the worn copper walls, glowing as if something within was alive. An old worker wrote in his notebook, "For a moment it felt like she was waking up," and it did feel that way. After 70 years of silence, the Statue of Liberty seemed to breathe again. The entire framework inside the torch was replaced. The old torch was dismantled piece by piece, marked and carefully preserved. A new one was crafted from pure copper, covered in 24-karat gold leaf, fitted with hundreds of glass panels to catch the sunlight by day and shimmer like fire by night. When the first layer of gold was laid, the light was so bright that workers shielded their eyes. They said it was a warm light, like memory. On July 4th, 1986, the new torch rose into the sky again. Thousands gathered along the harbor, watching the golden glow spread across the water. From afar, it looked like a second sun rising above the New York Bay. President Ronald Reagan stood before the crowd and said, "She has stood through war and peace, through hope and fear. And tonight, her light shines again for all the world to see." When the light was switched on, some people cried because they understood. This was not just a light of technology. It was the light of memory, the light that had once been locked in silence, now burning again for all to see. The new torch shone into the future, but the past still lived below, inside the old one. The original torch was placed inside the Statue of Liberty Museum, which opened in 2019. Visitors can walk around it. They can see the darkened copper, the burn marks, the iron frame that once trembled during the explosion of 1916. It is no longer a wound. It is a witness, no longer a broken part, but a piece of memory. In the soft light of the museum, the old torch still glimmers faintly. If you stand close, you can see the copper seem to move, breathing with the air. And if you stay quiet long enough, you might feel what the engineers once felt, that the torch never truly went dark. Perhaps the mystery has always been simple. The torch held a chamber, a heart, a light that once pulsed with human purpose. And though that light faded long ago, its echo still shimmers across the statue's green skin. Listen closely. Through the wind that sweeps Liberty Island, you can still hear it, a low, distant hum, like the quiet heartbeat of freedom, a light that needs no flame, a light that can only be felt. More than a century has passed. The torch still stands between the sea and the wind, from the dream of Edouard de la Boulaye to the hands of Bartholdi, to the steel of Eiffel and the day she rose in 1886. That light has traveled a long way, across oceans, through war, through time. In 1916, it trembled in the sound of an explosion. In 1986, it rose again in a new light. Between those moments of silence and rebirth, one thing has never faded: the meaning of the light. For a long time, the Statue of Liberty has been more than copper and steel. She is a reminder that even when the outer light fades, another one still burns within. The light of memory, the light of human faith. For more than 100 years, she has stood there, holding her torch high above the harbor. Ships still arrive every day. Generations have looked up to her, have cried, and have believed they had reached freedom. In the sound of soft waves and the breath of salt wind, people still remember the words carved inside her pedestal. The poem by Emma Lazarus. Those words still echo after all these years. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. She still stands beside that golden door, where the dream of freedom begins, not just as a beacon for ships, but as the light that guards our shared memory, a light that reminds us that freedom is not born from power, but from belief. Tonight, between the sea and the wind, that light still reflects on the water, no longer bright like the first day, but warm, deep and alive, like the long breath of time. The torch not only shines in the sky, it shines into the hearts of those who look toward it, those who keep seeking freedom, those who still follow the light. Across the surface of the bay, the reflection trembles like it is listening. The city falls silent. Only the wind remains, and one torch still waits, still watches toward the dawn. Freedom is not only a flame that lights the sky, it is the heartbeat of humankind. Still slow, still steady, still alive within time. Thank you for walking with me through the torch of memory. Until we meet again, when night falls once more over the city that sleeps.